welcome to Cali Formula One. My name is Jojo Joseph, coming to you from San Diego, California. Today we are going to recap the Bahrain Grand Prix. The first of the 23 races of the 2022 season is under our belt, and what we figured out is that we know nothing about what we're talking about. I felt really bad after looking at all my predictions yesterday, saying, man, I got a lot of stuff wrong here. Do I even pay attention to this sport? Only to look at all the experts and their predictions and realize that they were just as wrong as I was. And that's what I love about this sport. For all the technical details, for all the science and data and mathematics and engineering and analytics and testing and all that stuff, at the end of the day, it all flies out the window and you just never know what's going to happen. And today was one of those days where you had no idea what was going to happen. Just wait. I mean, I don't even know where to begin on the talking points, from Ferrari getting 1-2 to Mercedes getting a podium when no one thought after yesterday that was going to be a case. Kevin Magnussen, Valtteri, Bottas, Yuki Tsunoda, Guanyu, Zhou doing really well. And then seeing the McLarens and Aston Martins suffering really badly. But then obviously the big part of this whole race, other than Ferrari winning, was the Red Bull team completely falling apart at the end there. We're just going to dive right in and just kind of go through driver by driver, what happened to each person, how they did, and quite frankly, what they could have done better. Looking at the race right now, Charles LeClerc, first place, got pole position, got fastest lap, as great of a day as you could get. The thing about Charles that was going into this after getting pole position, everyone was talking, well, he's going to scrap with Max, and no, he's going to get very aggressive with Max. He's not going to be like Lewis, and he's just going to fight back. And to a point that may be true, but what we saw today was a Charles LeClerc that was very, very mature. He chose his battles wisely. He scrapped with Max. We saw a couple phenomenal scraps between the two as they came out of the pits. Max did take the opportunity to try to strike, but what we saw was a Charles LeClerc that really understood that he was racing to win. And that racing to win meant, letting the other person make the mistake and then capitalizing off of that. The best example of this was coming out of the pits when Max decided to attack him and locked up his wheel, and you could see that Charles saw that was going to happen. And instead of going to cut him off or whatever, he just let him go by and lock up and then just kind of went through, left Max Verstappen with a flat spot, and then just was able to build up a lead after that, a lead that he never quite gave up. So it's pretty cool to see him do that, because it shows that he's grown up quite a bit. I honestly think that the last 2 years where they were struggling, Ferrari gave him opportunities to learn how to, hold off better opponents, because there was times where, quite frankly, they just didn't have the pace and were being passed up by everyone from McLaren to Pierre Gasly and whoever else. And I think that's really helped Charles, those struggles the last 2 years. And same thing with Carlos as well. But for going back to Charles real quick, P1, top of the leaderboard right now. I know it's only race one, but you have to feel really, really good about how he did on this race. I just can't get over the fact that he really matured as a driver. To see him at the top this way, very confident, very, very calm and collected, thinking ahead, not overreacting. And I think that shapes up for a very good season for him. His teammate Carlos Sainz sounded a bit disappointed with this race. I'm not sure why, because he did really, really well, finishing number 2. But most importantly, helping Ferrari get that 1-2 and move up in the Constructors' Championship. He raced really well, qualified third, ended up second. And I think that he was doing a pretty good. He was actually really close behind Max before Max had his untimely demise on the racetrack. But I shouldn't have said it that way. But Carlos really did really well, and so he seemed a little bit down and out at the end of the race. I'm not sure why he felt that way, but I mean, he's number 2 in the rankings right now. He seemed to have a really solid race. Can't imagine why he would feel bad. You just have to feel really happy for him. And Ferrari in general. I mean, this is a team that had a lot of potential in 2019, and then some shady stuff happened, which we'll never know because the FIA wasn't very transparent about what exactly it was. But shady stuff did happen, and after that, Ferrari fell off for the rest of that year, and then 2022 completely struggled, and because of the COVID regulations, or the regulations being pushed back because of COVID, struggled all through last year, but they did show flashes of brilliance. These are two drivers, as I've talked about, have been consistently good together. They don't seem to have too many scraps with each other, which is really good for them. I mean, Charles and Sebastian seem to have a little bit of, scraps beforehand. So with these two, they don't seem to really clash that well with each other, which is good. They're consistently around each other, which is kind of a good balance here, because a lot of times when you have these two drivers that are on the same team that are close to each other, that competition comes out. With these ones, I don't know if it's Ferrari just having them in the right strategy and keep them in the right place, but they drive really well together as a team, and that's their benefit. That's ultimately going to help both of them as they both compete for a championship. So we'll see what Ferrari does, but for the Tifosi, this has to be such a great day and such a great feeling. And I'm really happy for them. Another team that should be feeling really good right now, which no one expected to feel as good, unless you're really, really a true believer, is the Mercedes team. Lewis Hamilton getting onto the podium, George Russell finishing fourth. Now this was, after yesterday in qualifying, something that you really didn't think was going to happen. The Mercedes was looking terrible in testing. We talked about maybe they were having some issues, but we also talked, and I'm going to mention this, like with a lot of these teams, you don't really know what's going to happen in testing with these teams. It's really not a good indication. It's not until you get to qualifying when you realize, oh, nuts, we have problems, or, oh, we're actually really good. And that's what we saw. Mercedes in general, the Mercedes-powered engines do not look very good. And that's not, Mercedes, the AMG team doesn't look good. For Aston Martin, it doesn't look good. For McLaren, for Williams, it just doesn't look good all around for them. With Mercedes, AMG, they were really struggling with porpoising. They're struggling to find pace. They looked fast in the corners, so there was some promise, but the realization was that maybe this team would not be competing with Red Bull. This team would not be competing with Ferrari, and you would have to see a little bit of pain over the next few weeks as they got back up to speed and made the upgrades. Coming into qualifying, Lewis Hamilton qualified fifth, which was great for him. George Russell made a mistake and ended up qualifying ninth. And so this was an interesting qualification for both of them. Just because, with Lewis, I think he was just trying to get the most out of his car. George making the mistake set them back. It was interesting to see Valtteri and Kevin Magnussen qualifying ahead of George Russell. That definitely would shake anyone's confidence, really. But the fact of the matter is that both drivers were able to rebound back. Lewis moving up 2 spots, taking the podium. This is now, I think he broke Michael Schumacher's record for the most consecutive years with a podium, and he's had 250 races with a podium. That's pretty insane. Greatest of all time. Let's just say what it is. That's pretty ridiculous, and that's pretty amazing for him. George Russell moved up 5 spots. Great race for George. Again, ended up in with a really bad qualifying position, but he knew what he had to do. Settled down, followed his race plan to the T. Drove really well. I don't think he had quite the pace as Lewis. As far as how they looked overall, I think obviously Lewis is going to be a better driver. But you do see amazing things coming out of George in this race, living up to the potential that he should have. 4th place is more than they imagined, especially with the teams that were supposed to be ahead of them, but also the teams challenging them. So I think that they came in saying, okay, is it going to be a struggle to catch up to Ferrari and Red Bull? But also, are we going to be able to fend off some of these up-and-comers? Are we going to be, I'm going to sound so weird saying this, are we going to be able to fight off Haas and Alpine and Alfa Romeo? But they did, and they managed to acquit themselves really well. A nice, decent haul for them in the Constructors' Championship. And most importantly for them, on the flip side of it, their bitter rivals, Red Bull, is at the bottom of the Constructors' Championship. So I'm going to say that again. Red Bull is at the bottom of the Constructors' Championship. This was a disaster for Red Bull in every stretch of the word, just because I still can't believe what we just saw. First, the first foreshadowing of it was Pierre Gasly, who was running a really good race. I think he was in 10th position, or he started off at 10th. I'm sorry. He started at 10th. He was moving his way up the pack, and then his engine just stalled out and caught fire. Luckily, he was okay, but the car was really on fire there. It was really engulfed in flames, and that's definitely an issue that they need to look into. And kind of joking around, did Honda make an engine that spontaneously combust or whatever? But it definitely was not a good look for Pierre, and you felt bad for him. He was the first retirement of the day. It was late in the race, but you're also sitting there thinking to yourself, well, is that the end of it? Is that all there is? But then Max, who was running 2, he started off in a good spot, and he made several challenges to Charles LeClerc. And again, he's very aggressive. Some people are going to criticize him for being too aggressive in those circumstances. Now, there's a difference. Let me just stop. There's a difference between aggressive and dangerous. And last year there was criticisms valid that he went overboard, and that's true. Today he didn't do anything that was remotely close to that, but he was still aggressive as far as braking late, diving into turns, not crashing into people, but he really went aggressive. But you also saw the fact that he overplayed his hand and was flat spotting and locking up the tires, not being able to get the most out of it. But on the other hand, you did see him where he did clash with the team where he wanted to push sooner on the outlaps, coming out of the pits just to be able to get ahead of Charles. So the aggressiveness is there. The driving skill is there. But like I said, I think with Charles, I think he was banking on Charles to be just as aggressive as he was, and that didn't happen. And that ultimately led to Charles letting Max make the mistakes and then capitalizing off of that. Small little things because he was still in the running of things, but there was that talk that he was having some issues. It was interesting to see the radio because Max was relaying back that there was issues, and Red Bull seemed to be very dismissive of him, saying, well, no, it's not, or everything seems to be fine. And he kept going back there saying, no, there's definitely a problem. And I'm not sure if they knew what it was and just wanted to kind of just say, hey, we'll wing it. Maybe it might be a problem, maybe not, might not be a problem. But ultimately, though, after the safety car, Pierre triggered a safety car with his car breaking down. Max quickly ran into issues and lost out. Disastrous retirement for him, defending his world championship, especially after, this offseason, he really wanted to come out and lay the hammer down and say, I am the champion, I am the one to beat. And not to end up on pole position and to struggle to get into first and not getting a first leading a lap at all. And then to have something out of his control, which is a car issue, and then to end up with no points at all, definitely is not ideal. Now, is this the end of the season? No, it's a long season. So we're not going to hyper-react on this show and pretend like the sky is falling. But at the same time, this is not ideal, especially to see, a title rival potential like Lewis Hamilton move up into, a podium spot. To see George Russell move up into just outside the podium, that just puts you on the back marker as far as catching up with these guys. And so they're going to have to catch up. And it wasn't just Max Verstappen who had issues. Sergio Perez, who initially capitalized off of Max falling out, almost immediately realized that he was losing power too. And one of the weirdest things, because going into the last lap of the race, and this is why we love Formula One, you're thinking to yourself, Lewis is catching up to him. Is Lewis going to be able to catch up to him? It's going to be very hard, but he can do it, and it's going to come down to the wire. I thought that Lewis was potentially going to have a chance to have a go at him. I think he was going to have a chance to have a go at him, to be honest with you, because it did look like Sergio was losing enough pace that Lewis was going to catch him and make a move at some point. Now, Sergio being the so-called Minister of Defense, would that have been a successful pass? Maybe, maybe not. But that was all a moot point because going into the last lap, Sergio went into a turn and his engine completely seized up on him. And that's really, that's really shocking to see, especially like back-to-back. First Pierre with the spontaneous combustion from this Red Bull engine, not a Honda engine, but a Red Bull engine. Then Max having that catastrophic failure he had. And then to see Sergio just completely have his car seize up on him, spin out. Wasn't no contact or anything. He just completely spun out, and to end up completely out of the race, retired. And so Red Bull ends up with 0 points, last in the constructors. And what should have been a very, obviously they went in high expectations of getting a win, getting double podium. That would have been great for them. And then to see that all of a sudden just factor away into nothing is completely, it's got to be pretty discouraging for them. Now, again, I think their mission is to get in and see where these reliability issues are. Is this something really bad? Is this something that could be fixed right away? It could have just been 3 flukes. It could have just been something where they said, okay, this happens, we'll work it out. At the beginning of the season, you are going to see stuff like that when they run these engines at high power and go long distances, and there's a lot of wear and tear. So they'll figure stuff out. So I think ultimately it's just a matter of figuring out what happened, getting behind it, getting the drivers understood, debriefed, and understood on what they need to do to make sure they manage that better, and then getting back out there. I think ultimately they'll be fine. It's just that now they have to hope that a little bit of that bad luck they had today falls on Ferrari and Mercedes' lap as well, especially at the beginning of the season, to give them the opportunity to kind of jump back up into the mix with them, which I'm sure they will. And I'm sure this being a long season, there's going to be opportunities for both Ferrari and Mercedes to have a bit of bad luck as well. Next up, I still can't believe I'm going to say this. In 5th place, Kevin Magnussen with the Haas team. Now, can you imagine 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, someone would have told you that Haas would be finishing 5th and the driver would be Kevin Magnussen? You would laugh in their face. You'd sit there and tell them, you don't stop smoking crack or something like that. You know what I mean? Like, there's just no way. And yet here we are, and I'm telling you that Kevin Magnussen for the Haas team finished 5th, and there's no fluke behind this. There's no craziness other than the fact that he ran out there. He qualified really, really well. He qualified ahead of George Russell and ended up moving up 2 spots and finishing 5th. This is the best that Haas has done in who knows how long. And this is a drama that goes back quite a ways. And this, it really is one of those feel-good stories. I'm being an American, obviously I want the American team to do really well. But it is one of those stories where we sit there and tell ourselves, oh my gosh, I cannot believe this actually happened. I cannot believe that they're able to get back on track the way they did. I think there's a great story behind this. So one thing I'm going to talk about, there's a book that's going to be coming out, Racing with Rich Energy, How a Rogue Sponsor Took Formula One for a Ride. It's written by Alanis King, who I follow on Twitter. And I'm really excited about this book. I'm going to plug it right now. I'm going to put the description to pre-order the book in the podcast description, on the website, and in the YouTube comments. So you'll have 3 opportunities to get this book. It's, like I said, you could pre-order the book. But I think this is really great. And, I think it's really great right now because with Haas coming back the way they did, you really got to go back to see where they got to this spot to begin with. Because when Haas first came out into the Formula One sphere, they were surprisingly good. This American team had came out. They had some really good drivers. They had really good performances. They were a solid midfield team with aspirations of moving up into a top tier team. And then things just started to go a little bit, awry with them. The first thing that happened, I think, was the fact that they had their drivers give feedback on what was wrong with the car and how to improve the car. And they did not listen to the drivers, both Kevin Magnussen and Roman Grosjean. They did not listen to the drivers. Instead, they went a different route, and the team completely suffered performance issues. And that really just kind of sabotaged their season. And then they made that move a few years ago to bring on Rich Energy. Obviously this so-called competitor to Red Bull coming into the Formula One, a lot of splash, a lot of panache, a lot of big words from their CEO, William Story, just, so many different things going on here. And then you find out that it was just all a house of cards. And I think what's great about this book, and this is why I'm excited to read this, and once I get it and I read it, I would love to have her on, Alanis King, as a guest, and I would love to talk to you guys about this and get your feedback as well, because I encourage you to read this. But I think it's going to show a great deal of how money moves in Formula One. Cash is king. We've talked about this before relative to Haas with sponsorships, because after Rich left, they struggled and they went to go find someone, and they ended up finding Cali, which got them Kevin Magnussen, which also got them the money to build the car that they have today, Nikita Mazepin, which got them the money which they were able to get today, which they bought back Kevin Magnussen. It's weird how this whole circle works, but I think that this book is really going to show great insight into how they got there in the first place. How sponsorships work, how they affect the teams, how teams are relying on that money, and what they have to do to get that money, and how to provide ROI for these teams. And it's not just Haas. I mean, this is across the board with some of these sponsorships, how they're put out there, how they're manifested. The great one this week that we saw was with McLaren getting Google Chrome and get the Chrome logo on their wheels. This is Zach Brown being a genius, marketing genius and corporate partnership genius that he is. But now they have to get an ROI behind it, which we'll get to in a little bit on why they're not bringing the ROI behind that sponsorship. But I do really want to encourage you all to get this book again. The link is going to be in the comments, description of the podcast, the comments on YouTube, and it's going to be on the website. Racing with Rich Energy by Alanis King, how a rogue sponsor took Formula One for a ride. So definitely go check that out. Getting back to the race, because we're going to go talk again more about Haas. This is just unbelievable. Kevin Magnussen 5th, and not just that, Mick Schumacher just outside the points in 11th, moving up one spot, qualified 12th. So this wasn't something where he just took advantage. This was Mick driving a really good race. He had some really good moments. He had some bad moments. He did get hung with the dry by not changing his tires, took a risk there. But he redeemed himself really well. For K-Mag coming off of 18 months or something like that without racing, and then just being able to jump in the car, having a great testing session, and then coming out here qualifying great and racing well. You just hope it could continue. It's a great story. It's a feel-good story. It's really what you want to see for an American audience that came in late because of Drive to Survive or wherever, not seeing the Haas team that was back in 16, 17. That was really challenging. This is really good to see. So I'm really happy for Haas. I'm really happy for Kevin Magnussen. I'm really happy for Mick Schumacher. Hopefully he'll get his points pretty soon. I'm pretty confident that he will. But yeah, I'm definitely interested in reading that book just because it's going to give a really good insight into this team that's now resurgent. Moving on to another resurgent team, Alfa Romeo. This was, again, when I made my predictions, I was like Haas and Alfa Romeo, they're probably going to be at the bottom, and here I am talking about them at the top because, like I said, like the experts, which I'm not, I know just as much as them, which is nothing. So looking at Alfa Romeo, Valtteri Bottas qualified 6th ahead of George Russell. So for all of you Bottas fans who were sad to see him leave Mercedes, that was a little bit of indication. Now, Valtteri is a great driver, and he's a great qualifier. And I've said this before, that he's great at qualifying, but he's terrible at his starts, and he's struggled in dirty air to follow people, catch up to people. So right off the bat, he had a terrible start. He fell quite a few places, which was, for me, I'm sitting there going I was right in that regard. But then as he raced back here, this is where you get to see something redeeming for Valtteri, which is he did struggle to get past Yuki Tsunoda, but he got past him, and he climbed his way back up, and he got into 6th place. A points finish. You can't write this better for Valtteri. I mean, the only thing that might have been better was getting ahead of the Haas, but to sit there and say, okay, we finished just behind, the Ferrari and Mercedes, only a couple seconds off the guy who replaced him, who's, it should be in a better car, but who knows at this point. But to finish 6th, this has got to be a great feeling for him right now. It's got to be such a redemptive feeling. And more importantly, it just bodes well for the future. Alfa Romeo did build a good car, which that was part of when Valtteri coming over. They built a great car based on his feedback and his expertise, and they're using that, and they're able to get instant results. Now they're going to be able to move forward and just try to get into the mix and try to do even better than that. So I'm overly excited for Valtteri Bottas, but also his teammate, Zhou Guanyu. And I have to sit there and say this, it's been confirmed that he wants to be called Zhou Guanyu. So we're going to change everything in our descriptions and all of that about him because we want to make sure we respect how we address him. So for all of you, I'm just telling you right now, Zhou Guanyu. So anyway, I'm done wagging my finger. But Zhou Guanyu, rookie, he started off terrible in the race, which he's a rookie. He's going to get wrapped up in everything, settled down, moved up 5 spots and get points. Again, a rookie. I think he's only the 66th driver to ever do this, 65th, 66th driver to ever do this, getting points on his first drive. But that's got to feel so good. That's got to just be such a confidence builder. And he had a lot of criticisms when he was coming in about he was a paid driver and he's not the most qualified driver. And Oscar Piastri is a better driver, who I think Oscar Piastri is a better driver. But then again, like I said, this is Formula One. So sometimes it's not the best drivers to come up there. So he did get some criticisms on his qualifications. But on the flip side of it, he's a great driver. And I've been telling you he's a great driver. But to see him come out there and get 10th, that's got to feel really good for him. And he did have a nice moment with Oscar Piastri in the post-race show where he did say, Oscar needs to be there too, and they need to be getting him a seat, which I think will happen next year. I'm predicting that he's going to replace Fernando Alonso next year at Alpine. But for Zhou Guanyu, this was what a great day. He's got to feel really good about himself, and just to be over the moon about pretty much just life in general right now. He's in a team that pulled a competitive car for his first year. He's got a teammate in Valtteri Bottas who's going to teach him so much. Valtteri's the type he's not going to sit there and say, get away from me. He's going to sit there and develop him as a driver. He's going to help develop him as a driver. And he's in a real, just for a rookie, I think he's probably in the best position a rookie could possibly be in, which is really, really great. Moving on to the Alpine team, a very, very solid day for Alpine. 7th and 9th. Esteban Ocon moving up 4 spots. He had a little bit of an incident right off the bat with, I think it was Mick Schumacher, and he had a penalty, but he managed to get through just fine. Ended up 7th, moved up. Great racer and put his head down, just mowing through people, moving up 4 spots. You got to feel really happy for him. Fernando Alonso finishing in 9th, lost a spot, lost that to Yuki Tsunoda. And for Fernando, though, I still think he's got to feel really good about this. 7th and 9th has got to feel really good for Alpine, especially considering some of their competitors or who we thought were going to be their competitors in the midfield. So it's really good to see both of these drivers do really, really well. For Esteban, it's also got to feel really good because this is his year to sit there and say, okay, Fernando Alonso may be a 2-time champion, but I'm the future of this team. I need to put myself out there and get the better results consistently. So this is a good start for him to do that. Sandwiched in between them was the only Red Bull engine driver that managed to finish, Yuki Tsunoda. Yuki had an amazing race. This is the one bright spot for the Red Bull conglomerate. I know they're technically 2 different teams, but technically, whatever. But AlphaTauri's Yuki Tsunoda in his second year showed a lot of promise and improvements last year. Came into this year saying, hey, I'm really going to show everyone what I can do in a Formula 1 car. And today he moved up 8 spots and finished 8th. So to get points on the first race has got to be really good for him. To sit there and take that car and get it to the end has to feel really good. And to be the Red Bull powered car that got the best result for sure has to feel really, really good for him. So definitely a bright spot for old Yuki there. Excited to see what he's going to be able to do moving forward. Again, Yuki's one of those guys. Like Pierre is a phenomenal driver. And as I said, I think Pierre's eventually going to end up in Mercedes at some point. But for Yuki, you could tell they're friends. They get along with each other. But Yuki's definitely on the mindset that I am going to get past Pierre multiple times this year if I can and show everyone how good I am. And I think today he had a really great race, a lot of great passes, and I think we're going to see some really good things from him. Now we're kind of going to move on to the bottom end, and we're going to talk about teams which they're all Mercedes-powered teams. And so this kind of speaks volumes to some of the problems that we're going to have with Mercedes and their power units. Not just the AMG team that's doing well, but right now Aston Martin. Aston Martin had Lance Stroll finish 12th. He was up 7 spots. They qualified terribly. So for Lance, it was quietly a good redemptive race considering he was qualified. He qualified really bad. I think he ended up qualifying behind Nico Hülkenberg, who replaced Sebastian Vettel. So Sebastian knocked out with COVID. They brought in super sub Nico Hülkenberg, which is a really nice story for Nico to be able to come back. Second year in a row, he's getting to be a super sub, but he was able to come back and sit down and race in the car. He did find himself 17th, considering he's been out of the mix for so long. To be able to come back and be able to do that, that's a really good story for him. Lance actually qualified behind Nico, which was slightly embarrassing to say the least, considering this guy is not driving and you're supposed to be the new A driver on the team. But he made up for it. Made up 7 spots, finished 12th. Again, for Aston Martin, I think that's kind of like the silver lining for a terrible weekend, losing Sebastian, and then just having a terrible qualifying day. But to be able to sit there and say, okay, let's see what Lance could do, and he put in a really good second half of the race and was able to move up 7 spots. That's got to figure really good for him. Sebastian should be back, so we really won't see how good Aston Martin is until next week, really. But I think they do have some things to figure out, both with Lance with qualifying, to see if they actually really do have the pace and to see if they could really get up there. But I think, for them being where they are, it's good for Lance, but also a little bit worrying as far as the race pace for the Mercedes engines. Next up, the Williams. Alex Albon finished 13th in the race. Good for him. Being in the car that he was at, outperformed his teammate who's had more time at Williams. But at the same time, you have to sit there and just wonder how good are they going to be once things get settled in. Latifi started 20th, ended up 14th. He ended up ahead of Nico Hülkenberg, but again, you're ending up in front of a guy who's was out of racing for a while. So for Nicholas, that definitely, I'm really not quite sure at this point what he's going to be doing, if he's really going to be producing. For Alex, you think that at some point he's going to unlock a few things, assuming that they could get that car up to speed. But with Williams, for all the talk coming into the season, it's got to be a little bit tough to see a backmarker like Haas leap up the way they do, and to see an almost backmarker, sort of faux backmarker last year in Alfa Romeo leap up the way they did, and Williams to sit there and say, okay, well, we're struggling to get out of being the worst team here. And so that's got to be really rough for Williams. So we'll see what's going to end up happening with Alex. I think he's going to be the person who their hopes lie on, because I don't think it's going to be Nicholas. And hopefully I'm wrong, but I just don't think he's going to have what it takes to help push Williams forward. Alex, on the other hand, I do think he can do it. He has some really good moments today, but we'll see what happens. We talked about the disaster class for Red Bull, but the story before that was the disaster for McLaren. Qualified terribly, started terribly. They had issues going in testing with their brakes. I was thinking going into today, that they were going to potentially just go out there and, just kind of collect data, say, let's try a few things. Let's see how we're doing. Let's see what works, what doesn't work. Lando qualified 14th. Daniel Ricciardo qualified 18th. And that's, that's like, no one could have predicted that, I don't think a single person would have sat there and said, oh, okay, they're having brake issues, but they're not going to qualify that bad. But to look at this one and see, Lando dropped 2 spots and ended up 15th. So just an overall, starting off 13th, ending up 15th, overall bad day for him. Danny actually was last for a little bit and then was able to move up and get 4 spots and ended up in 14th. But ultimately, just for McLaren, there's no silver lining other than the only silver lining is the fact that Red Bull completely imploded and they're ahead of Red Bull in the constructor standings. But to see Ferrari, who was their midfield rival last year, leap up the way they did, and again, to see teams like Haas and Alfa leap up, but then also see like Alpine, who they were looking down on last year, be consistently good, it's got to be a rough weekend for them. Is there a quick fix? No. I think for these Mercedes power teams, you're going to be looking at least 3 to 4 weeks before they could potentially make fixes to their team. And the same thing goes for Lewis Hamilton and George Russell. Going into next week, they may be where they're at, but for the Red Bull team, who's consistently been better, they're still going to be the favorites to beat them next week and still compete with Ferrari. Ferrari just looks like a beast right now. So we'll see what happens with them, and we'll see how that all goes. Now, we're going to switch gears real quick because we're going to talk about Saudi Arabia in a little bit. But before we do that, something did happen this week where what we were waiting for finally happened, the release of the FIA report. So after the calamity at Abu Dhabi at the end of last year, there was talk that they were going to do an investigation. That investigation was going to give insights on how things happened at Abu Dhabi, which effectively robbed Lewis Hamilton of his 8th title. Also effectively put Max Verstappen in a bad spot of defending a title that many people don't think that he deserved. And so this report came out, and, I was very cynical thinking, they're going to say we didn't do anything wrong, but here's what we're going to change. Essentially one of those things. We're not admitting what went wrong or what we did wrong, but we're going to change these things. Essentially, they're saying that Michael Massey made errors, but those errors were made in good faith. And because of that, and because of other things that really just don't quite make any sense, that the championship is going to stand, which we all knew it was going to stand anyway. They're not going to sit there and take anything away from Max Verstappen, and no one expected him to do that. But it also seems a little bit weird that they're not going to, sit there and say, I just don't know. Like, I guess the best way to describe this is they could have done much more, just either just flat out apologize and say, we completely screwed this up, and it won't happen again, but the championship stands, or they could have just sit there and said, hey, we did nothing wrong and the champion stands. But to sit there and say, like, oh, yeah, he made errors, but they were in good faith, that just makes it look terrible. It makes you look terrible because there's a checks and balances to that, which is if the race director screws up something like that, if it's in good faith, then the race stewards come in and say, hey, you need to fix this. And so that's why this whole thing is just a bit of a crock. And it's kind of a sour spot, especially for you Mercedes fans, for you Lewis Hamilton's fans, and just F1 fans in general on this week, on the opening week, that they waited this long on the opening week to drop that on right before qualifying. And you would just think to yourself, like, I mean, you know, are we going to get a reprieve from this? Are we going to feel better about this? Or is this just going to be something that's just going to make us really upset? And I do think that that's unfortunately, you know, it's just not going to solve anything. But ultimately, we'll see who wins this year and who does well this year, and if the transparency that they're claiming is actually going to happen. But we'll see what happens. But for now, we move on to Jeddah. We're going to Saudi Arabia, and we're going to racing next week in Saudi Arabia. So first race last year was definitely chaotic and exciting. May not have been the best as far as clean driving. If those of you remember the scrap between Lewis and Max in that infamous brake test, hopefully we don't see that this year. They have made changes to the track as far as making it a little bit more safe, but it is the fastest street track. It is going to be a fast race. You're going to see a lot of fireworks in qualifying. You're going to see fireworks on the track just because these cars are bigger. They are clunkier. So we are seeing these new F1 cars drive around and just be just a little bit more cumbersome. It did give us what we wanted to see as far as close action. But when they go around the turns and overpass with each other, they do look a bit clunky. So to see them on a street circuit is going to be a little bit interesting. We don't know what to expect. We don't know how these drivers are going to react, how the cars are going to be on a narrow street circuit like they are. But we'll see what happens. I think the good thing, though, is looking at the racing, we do see what Charles LeClerc said when it came to these new regulations, that there's like thirds. It gets you closer from a far distance. You're able to get closer to the car. Then there's that middle third where you are going to struggle to still break through 30 air. And then once you get to that last third of distance, then you're really going to be able to make a move. And we saw that. You know, you saw cars be able to close the distance a little bit better. Once they get into that middle third, then they start to struggle in the dirty air a little bit, and you have to rely on being a good race car driver. And then once you break through that, then when you're on top of the person, you're able to actually close up even more. And I think that's going to lead to exciting racing. So we'll see what happens next week. We're not going to do a preview show, as I mentioned, unless something completely crazy happens and some news that we need to address. But so instead, we'll probably see you next Sunday at the end of the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. Hopefully, it'll be as exciting as it was today. Thank you again, everyone who's been subscribing and listening. We just keep growing our audience, which is pretty astounding. Again, we're going to have the links to the website, links to the show, and links to the new YouTube channel. So make sure you subscribe to all of them. And also, I'm going to have links to Alanis King's book. So make sure you pre-order that book. We'll be talking about it once we get it and get that read. Hope you all have a great rest of your day and a great week. See you after Saudi Arabia. Have a good one.